Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. This is Frank Comito, Special Advisor to the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, and welcome and thank you for joining us. This is part of a two-part session. Part one on rebuilding intra-Caribbean travel. Today we'll focus on the profile of the intra-Caribbean traveler and understanding the obstacles and opportunities for stimulating recovery. We've got a great lineup of folks to share some insights with you. And tomorrow we'll get into the practical application of implementing promotions at a destination as well as at a company level, and some of the things you can consider and some of the opportunities that intra-Caribbean travel presents. And so we're going to, prior to jumping right into the program, we want to remind you that your membership helps us and we want to thank the CHTA members for joining us today. We value your support and encourage you to maximize the resources and tools available to you. If your company is not a CHTA member, you're missing out on valuable resources to support your business continuity. We need and want your involvement. So join my CHTA community today by contacting us at membership@caribbeanhotelandtourism.com. So to introduce our panelists and provide some opening remarks, I'd like to welcome our president of Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, Nicola Madden-Gregg. Nicola, I'm going to turn it right over to you.
Morning, everyone. Thank you, Frank. Really excited to be here to take on this topic today. This is a very important topic for us in the Caribbean and here at CHTA, and just want to welcome everyone, both our members and non-members. And as Frank said, if you're not a member yet of CHTA, please consider joining us. We have a very exciting year ahead of us, and everyone's participation is important to the recovery of Caribbean tourism, but also the continuing growth and development. If you guys will allow me to share my screen. We have a really great set of panelists with us today, and I will introduce them shortly afterwards, but we are joined today by the Honorable Albert Brand, Jr., the Governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands. We have also Neil Waters, the Acting CEO and Secretary General for the Caribbean Tourism Association, Jorge Hernandez, CEO of Aerostar Airport Holdings, which is the Luis Munez Marin International Airport, as well as Trevor Stadler, the CEO of Inter-Caribbean Airways. But to get us kick-started, I'm just going to do a little bit of an overview of what it is we're looking at in terms of inter-regional and inter-Caribbean, intra-Caribbean travel. Okay, so just bear with me, let me get my slides going. Okay, it's blocking me from doing that, but okay. All right, so as we said, today we hope to accomplish quite a bit, and we want to identify opportunities for businesses and the destination to not only reignite, develop, growth, and promote this segment, but to really get into sharing our best practices, both as companies and destinations, in stimulating inter-Caribbean travel, and provide destinations as well as national hotel and tourism associations with insight and information to support local policies and efforts to restore and grow. That's an important word, grow intra-Caribbean travel. Now, when we talk about inter-Caribbean travel, definitely we are speaking about Caribbean nationals going from one destination to the other, but we're also speaking about our international visitors being able to traverse the length and breadth of the Caribbean and experience the wealth of culture, music, cuisine, flora, fauna, fantastic vistas, and the people of the Caribbean. And as I said yesterday on a call, it's not just one Caribbean in a sense. While we are one Caribbean, we're also one very diverse Caribbean. And that's what we want to talk about today, the diversity, the level of experience that can be had through the Caribbean. So travel within the Caribbean has been slow to rebound, right? We have lost over 1 billion in revenue in 2021, and business and leisure travel within the region is estimated to have only recovered to 30% of pre-pandemic level. Now that's quite significant considering that in terms of international travel, we are probably in the region coming close to 70% of pre-pandemic level. So we are seeing major rebound for international travel, but travel within the region is not there as yet. We have smaller Caribbean economies and smaller locally owned businesses that are particularly hard hit by this, because a lot of the smaller companies do benefit from intra-Caribbean travel. And we also have our larger companies and countries that depend on regional trade to bolster local economies and sell local goods and services. Interregional travel return would stimulate higher local spending, increase trade in local goods and services, and of course, boost local revenues for our governments and our economies. So it's very important that we get onto this topic. What else has happened? The pandemic has underscored the importance of domestic and regional travel globally. We have seen that the first travelers in the mid-2020 were largely domestic. Whether it was whichever region it was, whether it was Europe, North America, there was a big push to get persons to travel again and to travel locally. This also stimulated a new kind of travel, and that is where we in the Caribbean really need to focus. We have to look at how we in the Caribbean, using the tools and techniques that we have, can really focus on building up our regional travel. The World Travel and Tourism Council reported in December that domestic travel accounted for 73% of total travel and tourism spending in 2017. Governments increasingly use domestic tourism as a tool to eliminate poverty, generate employment, economic growth, and upgrade infrastructure. Domestic travel helps address seasonality within regions while also dispersing travelers to less visited rural areas, which tend to be overlooked by foreign visitors. And you know how it goes. If we say this is a place to go as a regional traveler, eventually our international visitors are following us there too. So it's very important that we ourselves discover the Caribbean and are able to talk about it and share it with our international travelers. So WTCC recommends policies and practices to raise the contribution of domestic tourism. Successful destinations have adopted policies around pricing, marketing, promotional campaigns, interlinkages between transport and tourism, and direct incentives to support the sector. Dual pricing, where we have pricing separate from international to local for the local travelers, helps to offset those off-peak months, but also drives revenue into tourist sites and attractions. You know, in Florida, for example, we all see the Disney ads when the Florida residents have that 50% discount off. And that is a true way of showing how they push domestic travel to support their businesses. So for support and collaboration and partnership to build domestic and regional travel products, policies, and promotional campaigns, to adopt incentives to encourage domestic travel, and income earned from domestic travel can be used to build, develop, and protect heritage, cultural, and natural assets. Just a quick example of one country that has really taken this seriously. Thailand's We Travel Together recovery program provides food for thought. Their program was launched in August 2020. The government budgeted 640 million to promote and support domestic tourism as a part of their pandemic recovery. In addition to a promotional budget, the government subsidized a total of 6 million nights of hotel accommodation at 40% of normal room rates. This subsidy was capped at 3,000 baht, which is about 100 US per night for up to 5 nights. Subsidies for other services, including food, were capped at 600 baht or $20 US per room per night. In addition, domestic tourism traveling by air could qualify for a government refund of 40% of the ticket price, and that was capped at 1,000 baht or US 32 per seat with a quota of 2 million seats. This program reached its total quota of 6 million room nights by February 21, 7 months after it launched. During that time, at least 1 billion had been added to the Thai economy. So the Delta variant halted this program, but it was again reinstated in October 2021. So this is really policy in action. And this is what you call thinking outside of the box and driving domestic tourism in a way that probably many of us would have never thought about. But we have done something similar in the Caribbean. Many of us harken back to the days of Cricket World Cup in 2007, when as a region, we had to facilitate a large movement of people in a concentrated period across 6 regional countries. We had to look at how do we ensure ease of travel, and that looked at both passport and protocols were relaxed between these destinations. Affordable air and accommodation packages were put in place to encourage fan travel. And that was both in terms of Caribbean nationals traveling between the region, as well as international travelers. And this proved quite lucrative for us in the Caribbean and something that we can use going forward in our thought process. Recently, we have seen where Caribbean multi-destination partnerships and approaches have becoming more common. We have government to government being signed between Jamaica, Domrec, Cuba, and Panama, as well as private sector, regional and international brands promote stays at different destinations. These chains push out visiting the Caribbean, but visiting their various hotels within the Caribbean. So we see that with Sandals, AMR Resorts, Elite Resorts, Moon Palace, etc. So this is another way that we can look at it. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm not here to go through everything with you. I'm just going to give you that quick recap because we have a set of panelists that will really dive deep into it. And we are going to be focusing on building an enabling environment to support interregional travel. And this might include ease of travel protocols, reducing travel costs, incentivizing airlines, being able to create attractive and affordable travel packages, and of course, partnership, both between government to government, government to private sector, the hotels, the attractions, the airlines, etc. So we have a great day set for you. And I'm very excited to have introduced and stimulated at the beginning of the conversation. But now I would like to introduce our first panelist, who is really going to go into the detail. And that is our keynote presenter, the Honorable Albert Bryan Jr., Governor of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Governor Bryan is a strong advocate for regional travel and trade. He has benefited from having a successful career as a businessman and the leader of a nonprofit organization in the government service. He has a strong passion for the development of youth and previously served as the Commissioner of Labor. Along with the Tourism Commissioner, Joseph Basut, and the rest of his team, he has presided over a tourism renaissance in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Despite the ravages of the pandemic on tourism globally, in 2021, the U.S. Virgin Islands experienced one of its most successful years ever. Governor, we need you to share your secrets. And we thank you today for taking the time out, joining us all the way from Washington, D.C. We welcome Governor Bryan.
Thank you, Nicola. Listening to your wonderful presentation, it just brings me so much good feeling and memory as an excitement about inter-Caribbean travel. You know, the Virgin Islands has been a premier travel destination that emerged in the 50s and the 60s. And one could argue that the Virgin Islands of today could never be what it is without the Eastern Caribbean. For it's in the 70s when our population tripled. People came from Trinidad, Aruba, Dominica, Antigua, Puerto Rico, all over on the Caribbean to build our industry in oil and in alumina, and then most especially to build our tourism product. Today, you know, I like to call us the most diverse 100,000 people in the Caribbean or in the world. On any given day, you could eat roti, boiled fish, tucana, whatever it is you want, you're fancy from throughout the Caribbean as you traverse our neighborhoods and our towns. But inter-Caribbean travel is something that also was very, very crucial and played a big part So glad to see Jorge on here this morning from Puerto Rico, because Puerto Rico was a huge part of that. Early in my childhood, I can remember that there used to be a boat that came over every Sunday from San Juan with full of Puerto Ricans to buy liquor and jewelry, and the stores would open up just for them. We would often, every Christmas, we would get on the Premier and fly to Puerto Rico to shop in the malls over there for Christmas and bring all the toys back. The BVI has always been a great partner for us, and as the pandemic waged on, we really started to worry about what was happening in the Caribbean. Because, I mean, we, with US aid, we've been able to do very, very well in terms of we're the first place in the country to be able to offer vaccines to everyone. Our testing systems and the real protocols we put in place allowed us to really capitalize on the loss of the rest of the Caribbean. But that didn't make us gloat. It made us go to DC, where I am today, to advocate for more stringent protocols around cruise ships returning to the Caribbean to protect our sister islands from the pandemic who had less resources. Today, I'm in DC advocating for a visa waiver program in order that Caribbean nationals and other people who are visiting neighboring islands can come over to the Virgin Islands for short stays and be able to, we'll be able as an island to issue them a visa. This is already being done in Guam. And we think this is a big part of expanding our product. But I always think the Caribbean is one product. Change the music and the beaches and the sand and everything else remains basically the same. But as a people, we're very different. And people want to see more than just one single island. Why not do them all? This original concept came to me from a client I had that had an idea about taking people from island to island to experience different Gulf destinations. So you'd spend a couple of days in Puerto Rico, some a day or two in St. Thomas, and then on St. Croix. We have to do more of this, and I think that Puerto Rico is a big part of that. I want to commend the CHTA and CARICOM and all the Caribbean nations that have signed on to the Multilateral Air Service Agreement, known as MASA. These commitments are important in opening up our borders for commerce, trade, and yes, for tourism. Every time I come to DC and I'm here, my advocacy is for the entire Caribbean, not just the Virgin Islands. How can we have more of a US interest there? How can we bring resources, whether in energy, tourism, or whatnot, to our sister island? Because all of the residents of the Virgin Islands have people still residing in all of these Caribbean countries and are very concerned. So they're part of my constituent. As we look forward to the future, I think the success that we made in the pandemic is short-lived, and at times our belly is too full. Well, right now we have so much charter boats in our harbors that there's barely room to move around. We're looking forward to easier borders between us and BVI, us and Puerto Rico, so that mariners may traverse from one island to the next. We're looking forward to island hopping and being able to go to St. Lucia, Dominica without going to Miami and paying these exorbitant rates for the airlines. So Jorge Hernandez, the CEO of Aerostar, plays a big part in what I think is the future of the Caribbean, not only linking a massive tourist potential customer base in Central and South America, but actually being that base from which you can fly from any state into Puerto Rico and then hop to 2, 3, maybe 4 of our islands. So I thank you for inviting me on this panel today and look forward to a robust discussion in what is so important to not only the Virgin Islands, but to the lifeblood of the Caribbean in terms of commerce and trade.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate those opening remarks. So we are going to move on to our next contributor, which is going to be Neil Waters from the CTO, the Caribbean Tourism Association, Acting CEO and Secretary General. Now, Neil is going to provide some more statistical insights to support this conversation. And Neil, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. I want to thank the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association for the invitation to share this in this panel and share some information. And what I agree is a very important part of travel within the Caribbean. So let me just share my screen and we'll start. I hope you can see this. Okay. So first off, I'll point out, I'm going to go back a bit in time because, as was pointed out, once the pandemic started, interregional travel was, like the rest of travel, significantly hit. So I'm going back in time, and this slide basically gives a snapshot of what people travel for prior to March in the Caribbean, prior to March 2020. Some of this is obviously coming back, but you know, you can go through and pick out individual items. Business will happen. Visiting friends and relatives will happen. Countries will go back to requiring face-to-face meetings for immigration, visas, and so on. And you know, once the University of West Indies ramps back up, and some of that's already happened, and I'm using that as an example, you'll have people traveling for education, you'll have medical care. You know, there's a disparity in some cases in the type of medical care in certain islands, and people travel to the near island for certain intricate, delicate procedures, and so on. And then, of course, we have flight connectivity. To get from your island to a larger destination and back, oftentimes requires you staying in another destination, whether it's a hub or whatever the case may be. But I'm going to go back because I missed this one on purpose: recreation, including festivals. The pandemic clearly affected this bullet point the most because, and I'll explain that some more in a second, but the reality is this is something that, of all the other things, is actually now really coming back on stream, mainly because countries have, at the start of this year, to a large part, and late last year, indicated that they were going back to festivals in 2022. But the last point on this slide is also important. Of the countries that we assess in our statistics at the CTO, 5 countries depend on interregional travel as their main market, and then a further 4 is the dominant market. So we're talking about 9 of our countries that depend very heavily on interregional travel, or did before the pandemic, beyond the travel from the USA, Europe, Canada, and so on and so forth. So the reason why I'm focusing on festivals is this. During we went back and looked at the period 2015 to 2019. As I said, you know, basically no travel after March 2020 in this regard. And we look at a snapshot of some countries in the Caribbean, included in that group I mentioned before. And it was in the full group because there's some challenges in terms of the collection of information and so on. But what we saw was that there was a growth in interregional travel at 4% for each of those years. And the interregional travel was very noticeable. The increases were very noticeable in the months when annual festivals are held, which is somewhere between June and August, arguably varying from country to country, but that's like the wide range that we can work with. And the increases in interregional travel around those times were in the region of 50%, and in some cases 100%. So we're saying basically that once these festivals and so on were occurring, we saw that, you know, in the months where we look at the whole year, in those months, we saw a definite uptick in travel. And we mainly focus on that period, as I mentioned, June to August, because countries which have their festivals at the beginning of the year, which is prior to the start of the Lenten season, their festival will sometimes fall into the winter season, and then it's a lot more difficult to track the reason for the increase. But this one is very stark because we will see a flat line up until, let's say, June or so, and then there's a sudden jump caused by people flying in, etc., for the festival. And the last point, the remaining months of the year where no material increases were noted, there were a steady stream of arrivals. And obviously those arrivals would have been taken up, but would have been caused by the other categories that I would have shown on the previous slide: education, business, etc. For 2020 and 2021, the year-on-year comparison shows that there were declines in excess of 90% from March. I mean, that's not anything amazing to anyone, because we could clearly see this. and in some cases 100%. And that would be for the countries that depend basically on intra-Caribbean travel as their main market. We saw a slight improvement in 2021 as destinations reopened, but still significantly below 2019 levels. So moving to 2022, and I started to talk about this before. It started with a reduction in travel restrictions and announcements by several governments that there'll be festivals, even with reduced and managed formats. And the reality is we were focusing on festivals, but even we can broaden that to entertainment activities and activities which, because of how the Caribbean is, as mentioned by the governor a few minutes ago, we would have seen in the past as well, artists, etc., traveling to different countries for events outside of the normal festival time frame. It might not have been as large an increase or large an input as the festival, but we would have seen artists traveling between countries in an attempt to, perform. And they would travel with, in some cases, significant entourages. And a lot of these activities did happen in what we would have termed as the off season in some cases. In some cases, there might have been activities around Easter and so on. But the point is that the whole festival concept or the entertainment concept, as far as we can see, clearly shows that it inputs significantly into the catalyst, as a catalyst, for interregional travel. And furthermore, and this is the business component known to a large extent, reduced restrictions have resulted in plans by regional institutions, including ours, for face-to-face meetings later in the year. In some cases, face-to-face and hybrid, but the push is for face-to-face. So we should see some uptick as well in the business travel, along with the festivals. In terms of talking about things that can help with interregional travel, during the middle of last year, CARICOM would have indicated at the coming out in the heads of government meeting, I think it was July, speaking subject correction, that there would be, they were suggesting a push to reduce taxes on interregional travel. We've already seen some countries start this process, but it's a case where for full interconnectivity, that will need to have a lot more of an input by various countries, not just the one or the two, but so as to ensure that there's a pretty much leveling of the playing field. Of course, not trying to push CARICOM beyond CARICOM, but I'm just saying, logically, we can see that would be necessary. Continued routing adjustments by regional carriers to mitigate against significantly reducing the app footprint. One of the things that we know for sure is that in the pre-pandemic period, a lot of travel was obviously facilitated by the app, along with other carriers. But clearly, the loss of the app has had a significant impact on it, on interregional travel, and routing adjustments will be needed by the carriers that remain to try to move people. I know that in recent times we've had challenges where people have had to be very careful in planning trips, even to visit family around Christmas, because of being able to get in but not being able to get back out once the travel, the vacation or whatever was completed. And then creation of sustainable plans for heritage and cultural sectors. Nicola mentioned a lot of this, so I won't go into too much detail, but the reality is that culture and heritage can be a stopgap for travel in the non-traditional travel months. There are some product development specialists from around the region who have for years been saying we need to move towards a 12-year tourism sector. And this could be one of the ways to start the process. As Nicholas said, once there's movement in a direction, it will bring others as well. And best way to start will be to start with locals and regional people traveling to other countries to see the spas, to see the hot springs, etc. And just basically, in some cases, to enjoy a vacation somewhere else rather than going to a traditional location. And then based on the low infection rates relative to the rest of the world in the current pandemic, intra-regional travel, and once that idea of maintaining low infection rates in a future event, let's say, means that intra-regional travel for leisure could be a viable stopgap in a future pandemic or similar period of travel restriction. And then the last thing, I started a few seconds ago, but I'll end with saying this. A lot of us don't really realize that there's some really interesting gems just a few miles away. And we tend to look beyond the Caribbean, but I myself can attest to the fact to going to the countries near to Barbados where I live, and having an amazing experience that I remember for years after. And I think that we need to raise the awareness of the fact that a vacation does not have to be in a locale that is so far different from yours, but that there are things to do in locales near to yours that you would not normally experience. And it still gives you the talking points. It still gives you the social media inputs that we in the Caribbean want as well too, to be able to say we've been to this place. So looking at those gems nearby, I think is very important. And raising that awareness to the regional traveler could help in terms of pushing interregional travel in the future. So I'll stop there. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. That was some very good insight. And, just showing us that, there's some really practical things that we could do now. Definitely we can focus on how do we stimulate the entertainment sector again, how do we get our festivals going, but also how do we just share the diversity, as I pointed out earlier, of what you can experience through each and every destination. I wanted to just ask Governor Brian, before you go, a question. And I know we're running in between before I go to the next panelist. In terms of policy and promotional considerations, what do you think we could address to stimulate the return of interregional travel from your perspective?
I think the most important thing there is the support of the Puerto Rican hub. Whether we support a regional airline that we get that done through, or we do it by getting one of the bigger players like American to come back, I think that's key to being able to get that in the Caribbean. Liat has been trying for years. We try to do our own things here to support Liat and just promoting people. I think that type of policy that works together, that breaks down those barriers between our islands, whether it's trade, as Neil pointed out, medical care, education, that we become one Caribbean again, and really emphasizing the things that make us different.
Perfect. So definitely we need to have that hub that we can stimulate travel throughout the Caribbean, whether we may actually need two if we're successful enough. We may have to look at a second airport that will help us to push more and more travel throughout the Caribbean. So
I think Trinidad would be the other, so you have one at each end. Because Puerto Rico has 3 million people, they have enough people there that actually could generate that type of traffic. Them being, there's more Spanish speaking people in the Caribbean than there are English, as much as people fail to realize that sometimes. So the Spanish speaking Caribbean is a huge market that we've, for the most part, ignored. Puerto Rico has a lot of potential growth within the next 10 years with the amount of infrastructure that's being built over there. So we need to keep our eye on the Big Island.
Perfect. That's a very good segue. So we're going to now speak to the gentleman himself, Jorge Hernandez, who will tell us a little bit more about his views on this matter as the CEO of Eurostar Airport Holdings, which is the operator of the Luis Munez Marin International Airport. Over to you, sir.
Super. Thank you, and good morning, Governor. Good morning to my fellow panelists and everyone who's joining us this morning. It's certainly an honor to be here, accompanied by this great panel and experts of this subject matter. And indeed, and I think, as we start, taking on some of the words as the governor had just mentioned, I think I'm gonna give an overview of what has happened here in Puerto Rico. I mean, through the pandemic, which of course is the big disruptor, but I think it's interesting to see how and what happened in Puerto Rico and how that actually can translate to some of the ideas and concepts that we have been discussing this morning. I think to start off, from a overall results standpoint, Puerto Rico had a stellar year in 2021, which is incredible to hear when you think about all the stories, not just in our region, but when you actually look out to different parts around the globe, most are actually sharing the same story of really contracted volumes and really a very difficult situation for the tourism industry as a whole. But in the case of Puerto Rico, we actually had revenue for lodging actually exceeded $1 billion in 2021, which is probably about a 30 to 40% increase over 2019 figures, which were an incredible number by then. So we actually end up with another record number at the tail end of this pandemic, still on the pandemic, not on the endemic as we actually think we are right now. That actually meant that from a collection standpoint, from a government collection standpoint, that the collections were all-time high. And as we think about travel and sort of going back to the how and what everything fits into, it was a record year in terms of travel. We actually finished the year with approximately 9.7 million passengers in coming through San Juan in 2021, which was a record year. We actually had record traffic numbers from April 2021 all the way through December 2021. And that's actually continued over into 2022, when, for instance, just last month, we actually finished the month of March with over 900,000 passengers for the month and exceeding 2019 figures at the rate of 12%. So I think we're seeing a trend, we're seeing the demand, and I think we have to look at why that is happening. I mean, because the different steps that are taking place here, we have seen these results, and then we can see how that actually translates into what we're seeing as the pipeline into traffic coming up for the next few months. And when I say only a few months, is important to keep in mind because, and I think maybe Trevor will touch on this a bit later, but the airline mentality and the airline network planning has actually changed as a result of the pandemic. So you no longer have significant timeframes for planning and setting up the traffic and commitments for aircraft to different destinations. It's actually a much more closer window for airlines to move aircraft, call it, assets around where they can actually find better yields and more traffic to really be able to maximize that aircraft overall. But I think in the case of Puerto Rico, when we think about what has happened and how we see it going into the future, I think a key element, and I'm hoping that Brad is actually listening in to this. I think the role of the DMO was a key role in part of what happened and what we see as the results for Puerto Rico. Creating a strategy for top of mind, making sure that your target markets are aware that you're still here, that you still have this value for them when the right time comes, I think was very critical for us to really maintain and be able to start that pipeline really quickly after everything started to open up in mid-2020 and early 2021. That was very, very important. And I think on something that I think the governor mentioned earlier, health measures are key for travelers today. So the way Puerto Rico and the US Virgin Islands managed the vaccination of its population and the consistency of the processes for travel restrictions throughout the period were a key element for ensuring travelers felt secure and felt comfortable with traveling to the destination. So we basically did a number of different things that actually pan out to what we saw as the results today. And I think it's very important that we think about how we're gonna deal with the pandemic and the potential travel restrictions. There needs to be consistency. We need to figure out a way for measures to ease as we want people to start feeling comfortable to travel. And if we're thinking about intra-island travel, I think there needs to be consistency amongst all the islands that at least passengers know or potential travelers know, and they're not constantly changing. I think it's important to be consistent throughout this. So when you feel and you put in place consistency, proven track record, and a good marketing and top of mind strategy, I think it pans out in creating and sort of promoting this traffic that we're seeing, which to our point is we've actually been able to capture a significant market share from the traditional travel where we'd have taken years to get there. I think the pandemic actually helped us sort of leapfrog into that market share. So going into the comments around hub and the potential for hub, we understand our role for the region and how important it is. to the point that when we look at where we are today, Puerto Rico has approximately 28 direct connections to 28 different points of connection in the US. That's actually more than even Honolulu has today. It's actually more than Nassau has to the US, more than the Dominican Republic, even more so than the Mexico City airport or even Tocumen in Panama. So from a connectivity standpoint, at least to the US, which is from our standpoint, it's domestic, we have a significant connection network there and a significant number of airlines really connecting and using Puerto Rico on an OND, which is an origin and destination, that we should be able to maximize to really fill the gap that we actually have now in the region with the inter-island traffic, to really bring and sort of develop a true inter-island carrier to really help us sort of mitigate and bridge the gap that we have right now in the area. I think there needs to be a way to do that. I think we're positioning the airport in a way that we can maximize that. We have all the key players present in our marketplace here today, which are likely the ones that could actually do something around this issue that I think is probably the biggest issue that the region is facing. From a capacity standpoint, I'm actually happy to say that capacity for April and May is actually exceeding the existing capacity that was in place back in 2019 by over 20 percentage points, by 20% over 2019 and 27% over 2019 for May. That trend is actually carrying on through summer. I think we're still not quite where we should have been in 2020. Capacity, as it was published then, was much higher. I think we have still room to grow. And I think as the islands are able to really, structure and create that consistent messaging, I think we all can actually get together and really work in maximizing all the good assets and all the good things that the culture and the experiences that people can have in the Caribbean.
Thank you, Jorge. I guess let me ask you a quick question. How do you see yourself at the airport maybe strategizing to drive more inter-Caribbean travel? Because yes, you're doing well on your domestic side in terms of the US market, but what is your focus as Puerto Rico as a country, as well as the airport, in terms of being able to drive business within the region itself, the Caribbean region?
One of our key initiatives is actually developing further international traffic and developing the inter-island regional traffic. Obviously, the result of the pandemic is we're actually seeing a lot of the international carriers, as we know them, are quite hurt. They're not in the same position they were before the pandemic. A lot of airlines are not really operating the same size fleet that they had before the pandemic. So you're actually now really engaging in an effort to really entice players to come back to a region, but not all the players have all the assets they need in order to achieve that. So we have to really become more creative in how we create the perfect environment for them to really commit to the region. I think it's important. And from our standpoint, we actually have traffic development groups in Europe, in Latin America, and here that are actually currently dedicated in figuring out specifically how we do that, because it's one of our key initiatives for how we see it growing the profile into the next decade here in Puerto Rico.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Something I wanted to ask as well, Neil mentioned earlier the fact that we're not quite so sure why people travel. He's seeing the uptick. Sometimes he thinks it's festivals, but in the winter tourist season, with the airlines and with the airports, how do we improve our data collection? I mean, the traffic goes through the airports for sure. You are the first point of contact, whether it's an international traveler or a regional traveler. And I think we are lacking good methodology to find out why people are traveling. Is that something you're focusing on in terms of data collection?
Yes, data collection, and particularly in our industry going forward, is going to be a key element because so many things happened around the experience of traveling that the industry as a whole has not really gotten a hold of what drives that activity. So we have to figure out ways to better capture data. And it cannot only be captured at one instance. I think there needs to be segregated so you capture all the different data points throughout. We have actually engaged locally into our own sort of sets of surveys here. I know that we have initiatives that we're actually coordinating with our direct marketing office as well, or organization, meaning the DMO. There's others that are being sort of promoted or pushed for by the Tourism Association here locally. And I know the airlines group, we have a committee of airlines that they're also wanting to try to capture more information from a passenger perspective. So those conversations are actually taking place to figure out exactly what is the best way to capture this data. Because right now, and whoever says otherwise, please share what you have. But really up until this point, a lot of what happens in the industry is actually based on a blind, really sort of really trusted mechanism that it doesn't really know exactly what drives it. So I think it's very important that we really start digging deeper into what people are driving them to travel to a particular destination. And I think a very important thing is that top of mind is key in driving people's interest in a destination.
Perfect, thank you. All right, we have some very, very interesting conversations so far, and I'm going to go to our final presenter, which is Trevor Savaler, CEO of Intra-Caribbean Airways. And Trevor is going to give us his take on how do we stimulate, grow, and really move interregional travel to the next level. And then we're going to have a few questions for the panelists. So panelists, be prepared. I'm going to drill you with a few more questions, as well as some questions that have come from persons who have been joined us this morning and have been listening in. Trevor, over to you.
Good morning. Good morning, Governor. Thank you for joining the call today. Good morning, fellow panelists and ladies and gentlemen of the audience. Thank you for the invitation. To introduce Inter-Caribbean, inter-regional travel. Inter-Caribbean, we are a 30-year-old airline. Over the last 10 years, we've made this our mission to create Caribbean connectivity. And because in doing so, it doesn't mean that traffic suddenly appears. So it's been an ongoing work effort to both create and attract the traffic, which has allowed us over a number of years to go from maybe minimal connectivity between any 2 points to minimum, perhaps daily and double daily in some international markets where there simply was no such service existing in the past. It is that we've built, I use the word hublets rather than hubs. Airlines tend to use the word hub as a large mass of aircraft coming and going. In our case, the hub may be the coming and going of 3 to 5 airplanes that come in or in a time to come in and connect onward in a timely manner. So a connecting time through some of our hubs can be as little as 15 minutes. Now, many travelers wonder, how can we do that in 15 minutes? And it all depends on the airport and whether we're allowed to keep persons on those aircraft or not. So the goal in creating connectivity is to make it as easy as we can. And I think we've been fairly successful in building this over the last 10 years, where today we have close to 400 city pairs in our network that stretches from Havana off to the west side, to Barbados to the east, and since December of last year as we entered the Georgetown, Guyana market. And we have a handful of places in the middle that we have yet to add and to serve. But in creating first, it's the chicken and the egg story of what do you need first, the demand or the ability? And we've taken on the view and taken the risk to build the connectivity. And we've seen through this evolution, a true evolution of demand, where perhaps in the early days, much of what we did was moving folks who lived in one island, worked on another, and giving them the opportunity to come and go. But as we created greater connectivity, so it actually created greater employment opportunities in countries that needed specifically a Spanish speaker, for example, where we have quite a lot of Spanish company-owned resorts. So in order to provide the authentic experience, we need a Spanish speaker, even if it's an English-speaking country. And throughout this journey has been the mass movement of construction workers constructing new resorts in different places. And so there's been a lot of movement that in turn has created both the job for the short term and job for the long term. But as we have developed the network, so what this turned into is an ability for business to come and go and not feel, gee, I have to stay 3, 4, 5 days because there's only one flight or 2 flights a week, to pick the day of the week that suits me and I can come and go. But with the frequency that we injected into this network over time, where we didn't really previously have a whole lot of tourism traffic between islands, it is that number has grown to as much as 50% of the folks that travel with us to and through and around the Caribbean. And you could get on our airplanes and hear maybe 5 or 10 different languages being spoken that are perhaps other than Spanish or other than English, which is, it's remarkable to see how over time we've been able to attract a very wide and diverse set of travelers from around the world, not simply within the region. I would have to say the US is maybe the biggest contributor to tourism numbers, arrivals into the Caribbean. But for us, the US traveler tends to have a short vacation span. So they typically are spending their time in one island, and seldom do they actually venture to a second point in this journey. But so that's a little bit of the evolution of how we've begun to grow. Of course, the pandemic just decimated anything and everything we did. And we've been in the rebuilding stages since things began to open up in August, and slowly going through travel bubbles. Bubbles burst as quickly as they were placed into the domain. But business traffic in some of the new markets for us that we entered, which was a key driver in the past, it basically throughout the pandemic and maybe the year following, all but disappeared. And it disappeared because each country had overreaching requirements with respect to either PCRs, antigens, or quarantine elements, that nobody could go for a 1 or 2 day business trip without having to quarantine 5 days on either end of the journey. So business just went away. Now it's begun to pick up and begin to show itself again, but it's by no means anywhere near where it is. But we move from those into how do we begin to stimulate such travel again. And while there are opportunities for doing so, it tends to fall, it seems, to the private sector to come up with creative ways to actually try and make some of this happen and work. And governments tend to be standing on the sidelines, more with a handout for collecting the taxes and the fees that are applicable in these journeys. And we talk often about taxes across the region, and Neil had made mention of CARICOM proposals. And I would like to say, in fact, that I know of only one country that was party to that agreement that actually stood up and said, we're going to make a change. And that country was St. Vincent. I have, since I get heavily involved in the taxation issue for our company, I keep a very close eye on those things. So I can only point to St. Vincent, where it reduced by 50% its departure tax. Certainly there was conversation by many, but action only by one that I can point to. So taxation is a massive element that we have to engage with governments if we are going to have any opportunity to encourage regional travel. I shared with Frank in a conversation, Frank Comito, a real life example of a journey traveling with us between 2 points. The first leg of the journey was 1 hour and 15 minutes. The second leg of the journey, 55 minutes. And on a round trip basis, there is $312 in taxes that are payable for that journey. Now, that's more or less 2 hours of flying in each direction, but $312 of taxation, US dollars, not Caribbean, Eastern Caribbean dollars, but US dollars. So, so when we come to looking at how we stimulate things, no matter who you are, $312 is a lot of money out of pocket, never mind paying for 2, 3, 4 people in taxation alone. So unless we have some engagement with government on this issue, and the wording of interregional travel needs to be able to extend to interregional taxation, we should be able to go from one point in the Caribbean and a journey that ends at another point in the Caribbean and enjoy a different level of taxation. As you pointed out, Nicola, it was on my list of examples where as a Florida resident, you can go and visit Disney at a price that's different to someone coming from another state as part of the stimulating the local movement within Florida to come to Disney. And that's a powerful example of taking the same concept that unless we begin to act as one region, we're doomed not to ever, well, we're doomed to ever continue talking about this with no outcome. And we advocate that this taxation level across the region ought to be no more than half of an international traveler's. If we have any hope, we can continue to team up in the private sector with airline, with providers to create an interesting package. But when the taxation element is layered on top of this, the numbers are massive. So what we're going to have is travel because I've got little choice, or travel because I must, or travel because there's a reason I have to be somewhere, and not discretionary travel, which is what we need in terms of building the idea, let's just get up and go because we can get there. We've had governments approach us to say, can you reduce the airfares? We say, can you reduce the taxes? And everyone is silent. So
that's a good point, Trevor. And I would love to continue on the point along, but we are head on to our finishing time of 10.
Okay.
So my moderator in the background is going, time. We have to wrap. But
Yes.
I definitely think that's a strong point, that we need to focus on the taxation issue and how do we reduce the cost of travel within the region, both from a tax point of view, and of course, how do we encourage frequency and demand so that, of course, airlines can be more aggressive in terms of the kind of rates that they can offer, because then the numbers are there, the demand is there. And so we really do appreciate your insights on that, Trevor. We have just one last question, and it's actually with you as well, Trevor, is in terms of code share, is that something that the airlines within the region are working strongly on in terms of allowing more codeshare agreements also with major US airlines as well as regional carriers to offer multi-destination experiences for the regional as well as the US international travel.
Well, certainly I can share with you where we are. We have interline agreements with Caribbean Airlines, with Winair. We set out long before the reduction in LIAT to actually cooperate with LIAT. We never did get there. We have an interline agreement with Cubana and the island next door to us, and conversations, also with Air Caraïbes, who is both a regional airline and a long-haul airline out of the French Caribbean. We have interline agreements with the longer-haul European providers, and we're about to add 2 more to this offering, creating additional connectivity from Europe. When it comes to the US, the politics has tend to been, well, if we fly there ourselves, why do we need you? And so that's a fair observation, of course, but what it does is dampen down the ability to be able to have those carriers sell a multi-destination. So we continue to have those conversations, but it hasn't been successful with the US carriers for those reasons. And the European carriers are much more focused on the Caribbean. And so we're expanding our particular agreement with one carrier here that will announce some more details about that soon. But we focus where we can on creating these agreements because it's important to feed the onward points from perhaps an arrival.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for that, Trevor. Okay, we're coming close to the end, and just wanted to thank our panelists for everything that they have contributed this morning. I'm just going to ask each of you to just say if you had one action that you think we should take right now, today, to improve and to grow and ensure that interregional travel becomes what we all dream and want it to be, what would that be? And I'm just going to go around. I'm going to start with Governor Bryan as what would be your the one action?
I think thinking as One Caribbean is the biggest action. Recognizing that while we do compete for tourists, that thinking of us as a region and acting regionally will really just make it better for everyone. And this conversation is certainly credit to that. Multi-destination tourism works. The cruise ships, just ask the cruise ships, they know. People want to see more than just one island. So these conversations, I think, are crucial and are making those strides forward.
Perfect. Thank you, Governor. Neil, would you like to say your one thing?
Continue collaborations, following on from what the governor said, and the fact that has been very beneficial during the pandemic. And when we did our World Tourism Day event last year, it was clear that several stakeholders in the region are of the same view on a number of things, including sustainable tourism. And this is a major cog in sustainable tourism. So collaboration continue.
Okay. Jorge? You're muted, sorry.
Just like the governor and Neil just mentioned, I think collaboration is key. And I add to that consistency. There needs to be consistency. People need to know ahead of time, what are they subject to when they're traveling.
Perfect. Trevor, you have the last comment.
Thank you. Well, I would I would encourage the destinations, the tourism authorities of the different countries to actually help us all collectively by investing some of your tourism advertising and promotional dollars in the region, where we have actually, I know of only 2 countries who have a formal engagement in the region, whereas most everyone else is all about the rest. So we can combine that together with a review of taxation, and let's not be fearful that a reduction in tax isn't going to be a reduction in revenue. You will see an increase, and we can give real life examples of where that success happened.
Thank you very much for that, Trevor. For me, it's definitely looking at the diversity of the Caribbean and pushing that out. Because sometimes, even though on our end, we know that policy drives it, but when the demand comes, if people start to really understanding that bucket list is that I must visit every island in the Caribbean as a Caribbean national, and that is a unique and different experience every time, which is my bucket list to do. I'm halfway there. I think we will see a different approach to the market because we know the demand is there, and then we would have to meet that demand. So there are some of the good things that we need to all focus on. Thank our panelists this morning for all the good insights that you have given us. And ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for joining us today. We will be addressing some of your unanswered questions individually, and we invite you to join us for our second part tomorrow, our session tomorrow, which will be going into the more practical approaches, dealing with marketing, dealing with tour operators, travel agents, hoteliers, and seeing how we can continue to stimulate interregional travel and definitely make the Caribbean a complete destination where all of us would want to go from island to island to really experience all that is the Caribbean. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for joining us today, and we at CHTA will continue to push this conversation. It is our mandate to ensure that interregional travel not only becomes pride of place, but grows and really is one of our main sources of market share for the Caribbean region. Thank you again, and we will see you all tomorrow.